the cost of burnout in your high performers, the people that you most need not to drain, is several orders of magnitude bigger than the cost of, say, somebody who was always coasting. You know, when a coaster checks out, you know. But when your best person checks out, it's often quietly, it's gradually. They can still be hitting their numbers, right? We said that sometimes in the midst of burnout, early stages, the production will go up. So if your best person is checking out, you're not going to know. You're not going to know until perhaps they leave or until they tell you in an exit interview this thing that they've been holding on to for the last year and a half.
Welcome to You Might Try This, a podcast about learning how to lead without losing yourself along the way. Hosted by executive coaches Stacey Philpott and Cade Cowan. This show draws on 25 years of experience working with high-level leaders and brings those lessons down to earth. If you're navigating leadership for the first time, managing people, questioning old rules, and trying to build a career that actually feels good, you're in the right place. This is You Might Try This, honest leadership advice for ambitious people who still want to sleep at night.
Welcome back to You Might Try This. This is the show for leaders who are figuring it out in real time. I'm Cade, and of course, as always, I have Stacey with me.
Hi, everyone.
So last week, we sat with this cost of silence, and that's what happens when your team learns it's not worth telling you what they actually think. And the place we ended up was, you're making bad decisions on bad signals if your people aren't telling you the truth. So today we're going to go one floor down because there's a signal that's even more expensive than the one your team is possibly hiding from you. And that could be a signal that you're hiding from yourself, right, Stacey?
That's right. And we are talking about burnout, specifically the burnout that's the hardest to catch, your own and the burnout in someone on your team who's so good at their job that no one's really paying attention or looking.
Yeah. So let me start with a story because the way that burnout got named is, I think, pretty important. It's something that not a lot of people know. So in 1974, there was a psychologist in New York and his name was Herbert Freudenberger. He was running a free clinic in the East Village, doing volunteer work and treating addicts and runaways and people that, the rest of the system had just given up on. And he wasn't studying burnout. He was a clinician. But what he started noticing working alongside other volunteers doing good work was that the most committed people on the staff, and by most committed, these were the ones who never said no. They took the late shifts. They took the cases that nobody else would take. They were the ones that were falling apart. But they weren't falling apart loudly. It was happening quietly. They got cynical. They got cold. They started showing up irritated by the same clients that they used to have real empathy for. Mm-hmm. And then some of them got sick more often and some of them just stopped coming in. So he started writing a paper about what he was seeing. And then get this, halfway through writing it, he collapses. He's hospitalized. So the guy writing the paper about the syndrome was in the syndrome. And so then he used his own recovery to finish the paper, and he gave this syndrome, a name. He called it burnout.
What I think is interesting about that story that gets lost, Cade, is that who he was watching when he named it burnout. He wasn't watching slackers. He wasn't watching people who weren't committed. He wasn't watching people who were disengaged. He was watching the people who actually cared the most about their clients and cared the most about making a difference. The ones with the highest standards, whose identity was caught up in making a difference and showing up for others. And so really, if you think about it, burnout was named as a syndrome for high performers.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we often forget. That's kind of what gets buried. The other piece of the story that I think is worth offering up is what came after Freudenberger. So there was a researcher at Berkeley, and her name is Christina Maslach. And she took the thing that he named and she built the model that we still use today, the Maslach Burnout Inventory. Mm-hmm. And it's probably the most used instrument in burnout research, like 50 years of this and counting. And so she broke burnout into three things. And, anytime that we can take a term and deconstruct it into component parts, I find it incredibly helpful.
Very,
you
very
and I
useful.
love the trust equation, right? It
we do.
Deconstructs. So she deconstructed burnout into three components: exhaustion, cynicism, and then this reduced sense of effectiveness, this feeling that what you do doesn't matter or it doesn't work. So here's the move that I think makes the rest of this conversation work. Most leaders and most people assume those three things show up in that order. Tired first, then you're cynical, then you're ineffective. And that's kind of the script that we carry around in our heads. That seems like the logical flow. But as research often does, it points out that it's actually the other way around.
It is the other way around, which is that the first thing that usually goes or starts to show up for people is cynicism. The little voice in your head that used to be curious about a problem, now you're just annoyed by it. Right? You're just rolling your eyes more. You're annoyed. I've heard this a million times.
What fresh hell is this?
Yeah. Oh, another change initiative? Fantastic. And so the cynicism is what shows up first. Then comes the loss of efficacy. People feeling like their work isn't making a difference the way it used to. No, this doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep doing the same thing. Who's watching? Who cares? And exhaustion is what actually shows up last. And unfortunately, the most visible sign of burnout is that exhaustion, but it's what comes at the end as it's building. So other people can't see you as much if you're cynical, unless, you're rolling your eyes significantly in a meeting, which we generally don't advise people to do.
Think about that. Exhaustion shows up last, and that's like the signal everybody's looking for first. So what that means is by the time you're actually looking at the right signal, you've kind of been bleeding out for months, right? This burnout has been building for a while.
Exactly. I'm thinking about a coaching client I had, and, they say, I just need to go on a vacation. I'm so tired. So tired. I just want to go on a vacation. And 8 times out of 10, we all could use a vacation, but the vacation is not going to solve it. That's not really what they need. They needed a vacation 8 months ago. When this was starting. What they need now is to reconnect how they're making a difference and how their work matters.
So that's what we're going to spend this episode talking about, are the early signals, the ones that the high performers, our listeners included, miss every time, why we miss them and what they actually look like, and then what you should do once you see one. That's where we're going on this episode.
Love it.
So let me say why this is so hard to see it in yourself, because there are actual reasons. It's not just people are bad at noticing things. So again, there are basically 3 of these reasons. We love points of 3, right? The first is what Maslach later called the compensation problem. So high performers don't break in obvious ways. They actually double down. So and this is so interesting. The work doesn't drop. It gets harder for them to produce, but the output stays steady. Sometimes it will even rise in the short run, right? Again, compensatory. People start feeling like they have to compensate for these feelings. So this visible signal, am I still delivering? It looks fine, better than fine. Maybe the work has actually increased. So in fact, it looks great.
Looks great. And the output then is the alibi. As long as the output is good, you can tell yourself nothing's wrong. I'm still getting the work done. And people around you, they may say, gosh, you're working really hard, but they kind of think everything is fine too, because you're getting it done. Your boss is happy. Your team is hitting their numbers. The data says you're crushing it. But you might wake up on Tuesday and say, I just don't want to do this anymore. I can't quite face the day, but I seem to be doing okay. I'm getting my work done. Look at the quarter I just had.
Yeah. So that's the first reason. The second reason is the one that we already named. You're scanning for the wrong signal. So if you think burnout is a fatigue problem, you're asking the question, am I tired? And the answer, at this stage is usually some version of, yeah, but I'm always tired. I'm at 50. So that's normal. Nothing registers, or hell, I'm 40. It happens starting early. So the first signal is not tired. It's kind of distance. The thing you used to lean into, you're starting to lean back from. That meeting that used to feel productive, now I find reasons to kind of half skip them. The colleague that used to make you smile, you're now hoping they don't message you. But none of that registers as burnout. It kind of registers as, hey, my boundaries are just a little higher this month. but that's probably not accurate. It could, in fact, be a sign that this cynicism, which is the first sign of burnout, is starting to creep in.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a client I had a couple of years ago, actually, who stated that he was having trouble getting through his one-on-ones with his team. So that was the presenting concern. He didn't say anything about burnout, right? Just I'm having trouble one-on-ones on my team because my team keeps doing the same thing over and over again, no matter how much feedback I give them. It's the same thing. They're not bringing any new information. They're not willing to try anything new. I've seen this a million times. Didn't say the word burnout in any of that. Just my team can't learn. There's nothing new, which was a bit of an odd sentence. So enough that it piqued my interest. And when we talked more, it became apparent that what was actually happening for him was he was overwhelmed and feeling ineffective. So he was feeling that he wasn't doing anything new. He was feeling that he wasn't making a difference and was putting that on the team. The team was actually sort of the same when we looked at it specifically, but he had less of himself to give to the work, if you will. And so he, as priorities around them were changing, he was getting more frustrated and more overwhelmed, and everything they brought him felt less significant, less useful, less meaningful. He didn't believe he was experiencing burnout. It was simply that his team wasn't bringing him good work.
I think that's really interesting. And I also think what you say, high performers are going to be a little hesitant to even use the word burnout, right?
Yeah.
So
it sounds like a failing or a weakness. It sounds
like a failing,
right?
A shortcoming. So the fact that you're actually listening for something behind the words, as you always do, is important there, because that's not going to be something that a lot of people admit to. So, Stacey, there's a third reason that is hard to see. And I think this is the most important one because it's kind of structural. So Maslach, that same researcher, she eventually argued that burnout isn't really a person problem. It's a fit problem between the person and the conditions they're working in. I'm sure you've seen this.
I think that's a very useful reframe for people because it gives you, if you think of it that way, it gives you something specific to look at instead of just putting in more effort and trying harder or feeling vaguely worse. You can say, what is the gap? What's happening in the conditions around me that's changing, and what gap is it creating?
Yeah. And what was cool was Maslach didn't kind of leave that statement in the abstract, this fit problem. She actually mapped where the gap can actually show up at work. She said there were 6 places. So 6 things that, if they go sideways for long enough, will break you regardless of how resilient you are. So one is workload that's chronically more than the time that you have. Sound familiar? Loss of control over how you do the work. We know that autonomy is a major driver, so that loss of control can really emphasize that gap. Reward that's drying up. So this isn't just like money. This could be recognition. Whatever you value in the form of reward is starting to dry up. Community that's eroding. The people that you used to laugh with are gone or they're distant. We talk about best friends at work, and I've experienced my best friend, being transferred away, and that hurts. Then there's also number 5 is fairness that's slipping. So if you're seeing like favoritism or broken promises, or as we've alluded to before, you're passed over for the promotion that you thought belonged to you. And then, of course, lastly was this values misalignment. So like being asked to do things that don't really fit who you are. And according to Maslach, any one of those you can tolerate for a while. 2 or 3 of them, at once, for months, that's what breaks people, even especially high performers.
It's another compounding effect, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I like that definition because it helps people move from why am I tired, or what's wrong with me, or maybe I just need to, sleep more, to how are the conditions around me changing, and what then do I need to do to address them? Which
it gives people some agency then, right? Like,
correct.
Now I got something I can work on.
Right. Do I need more community and connection? Do I need to set boundaries to get more control? Is there some recognition that would be meaningful to me that I can go out and seek or try to figure out how I can get? It also helps, even more importantly, to know how you can help your team when they are burning out. You can look at the conditions your people may be experiencing and both anticipate where burnout could happen and what are the ways to address it.
Mm-hmm. So this is the bridge to the whole reason this is a leadership conversation and not just a self-care conversation. The cost of burnout in your high performers, the people that you most need not to drain, is several orders of magnitude bigger than the cost of, say, somebody who was always coasting. When a coaster checks out, you know. But when your best person checks out, it's often quietly, it's gradually. They can still be hitting their numbers, right? We said that sometimes in the midst of burnout, early stages, the production will go up. So if your best person is checking out, you're not going to know. You're not going to know until perhaps they leave or until they tell you in an exit interview this thing that they've been holding on to for the last year and a half.
Last week we talked about the silence tax, Cade, and the cost of your team. You mentioned this earlier, the cost of your team not telling you what they actually think. Burnout is one of those things that they will not tell you about. People don't generally talk about it, although there may be that one person who's constantly complaining. But other than that,
they were burned out.
Other than Sally's complaining again. Other than that person, burnout is generally one of the things that your high performers will not tell you about. And not because they're hiding it from you on purpose. It's because they're hiding it from themselves first. Remember, they're looking for exhaustion also. So when it starts, they may not recognize it. And by the time it's identifiable to them, it's been missed for a while.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So question, Cade, if we know that people are generally scanning for the wrong thing, what's the right thing to be looking for? Let's spend some time here because I think this would be helpful to our listeners and to leaders if they have a better sense of what should they be looking for.
Yeah. So, it's kind of like this small set of instruments that you can read on yourself or read on someone that you're worried about. Let's not think of it as a checklist, but it's just like these little instruments, if you will. That's where I think we can go. Why don't you start with one and then I'll add to it? How about that?
Okay, great. So I'm going to start with one all of us can do because all it requires is looking at your calendar. And most of us have some kind of calendar that's driving our days at work. If you put your calendar from a year ago next to your calendar today, you can print out a page of, this week, last year, right? Mm-hmm. What's been quietly subtracted? Not the meetings, because we all know those tend to expand, but the other things, the lunch you used to take, a walk between meetings that you had with, or a walk on a Friday with a friend, the Friday afternoon you used to leave open for strategic thinking or new ideas, visits or conversations with mentors outside your company, the catch up with a colleague you actually like. Working out. What is the thing that you were reading about in a book? When you look at what is subtracted, right? What am I missing here? That's what we're looking for. Because when people are feeling drained and moving towards burnout, they don't usually announce, hey, I'm going to, take out all the things that help me feel good about myself. And I'm going to, get rid of my friends. That's not how it happens. It's just that something gets scheduled over it. You don't decide to stop calling your sister back or, not working on another project at work that's really meaningful for you.
Going to the gym.
It just sort of begins to fade out. Mm-hmm. And if you sat down and you listed everything that's quietly fallen off in the last 6 months, that list is a diagnostic. That list helps you see what's being subtracted and can help warn you if burnout is on the way.
Yeah. And that subtraction can actually become kind of brutal because each individual thing might seem trivial. We'll explain it away. Well, I just don't have time for the gym this week. Or I'll call her back next week. Like each one in isolation, no big deal, but kind of add it all together in the list of subtractions, that becomes the thing.
Exactly. Look at the thing holistically of what has been subtracted from my life and what might that mean for me.
Yeah. So that's one signal, this kind of list of subtractions, if you will. Second signal, and this one comes directly out of Maslach's framework, and that's this kind of a cynicism marker. And the cleanest version of it is what I would kind of explain as a language drift. So if you watch yourself talk about your work over the last quarter, has the language gotten flatter? Has what you might have described at one point of interesting or tricky, now you're like, this is dumb. This is annoying. Why are we even doing this?
Not again.
Yeah. And the work didn't get dumber. You just kind of got a little cooler. Like you got a little numbed to it. The canary in this coal mine is kind of the intellectual interest, the interest that the work has for you. So when you stop being curious about a problem and now you're simply annoyed by it, that's not your personality changing. That's a signal that something's amiss.
Yep. And I want to add that, as we said earlier, the cynicism doesn't usually show up about big stuff. Mm-hmm. Cynicism shows up around the small stuff. Another all hands meeting, the prolific emails from all leaders in the company about the meaning of Memorial Day, the recurring meeting. You've got that one too, one time.
Really good,
the recurring meeting where nothing gets done. It's those rituals of the job or those places, again, where you don't feel like you're making progress or you have any momentum. People stay engaged with the high stakes, important parts of their work for a long time and a longer time. Where they start to feel cynical is on the smaller day-to-day things, which is part of why you don't catch it. It seems kind of normal to roll your eyes at that, email about Memorial Day. And that doesn't catch people off guard. It's stuff a normal person might roll their eyes about. But when somebody who used to roll their eyes very little suddenly does it a lot, that's a signal.
So that was the second one. This kind of where's the creeping cynicism. And then the third one is a little harder to put words on, but I think it's perhaps the most important. And it's kind of like, if you will, this joy gradient, like what used to fulfill you that now actually doesn't. And this is a bit of a coaching question. So Stacey, I'm going to let you run with this for a bit.
Perfect. And if you think about where joy often comes at work, it's when people have a sense of fulfillment and meaning. And one of the things that leaders struggle with is that while achieving your goals at the end can give you a sense of meaning, in today's world, the length of time it takes for you to achieve something has gotten so much longer. There are more people to check in with, more cross-functional dependencies, more process checks.
Moving deadlines, moving targets. What does it even look like to achieve a change when the change has now already shifted again?
Correct. And decision rights, things you thought you had a decision over, you actually don't. And now there's a new governance body and et cetera. So it can take a very long time. Changing regulations, not a lot of stability there right now. So a lot can be changing. And to get to the finish line now takes even longer than it used to. So what people need to in order to stay engaged at work, we used to think it was achieving goals. But really what we understand now is that it's about a sense of momentum. Am I making progress? Going back to your first example of the person who was the clinical worker, they might not have felt that they were making a difference with their clients or helping people enough. If people see that they are making a difference, then they feel that sense of joy. That joy gradient comes in because they're making a difference. So what I ask leaders frequently is, where are you feeling a sense of progress? Where were you 6 months ago, and what difference have you made since then? Helping them reconnect to the impact they're having is key in providing someone a sense of meaning and reducing burnout. And often it helps to step back and look at a longer time span, if you will.
And Stacey, I'm thinking about in an earlier episode when we were talking about Teresa Amabile's work on the progress principle. And as a leader, how do you contribute to your employees' kind of positive work life? And, her whole theory is it's about helping them make meaningful progress. And it doesn't have to be huge, but people have to see meaning in the work. So I'm just connecting what you're saying now with something that we've talked about before. And, speaking of meaning, meaning is the part that's really hard to fix with rest. If you're feeling a lack of meaning, you can sleep 8 hours a night for 2 weeks and still not have that come back, which is part of why I just need a vacation is usually like the wrong diagnosis. You can come back from vacation and the cynicism's still right there waiting on you.
There's one more thing I've observed when it comes to burnout, and I think this is very hard for people to see because it's about the narrowing of who you're paying attention to. So, for example, when a leader is doing well, they're often tracking a wide range of people. They're observing, paying attention, aware of usually a much larger group of people. They check in with the quiet, more introverted one. Maybe they notice the new person and ask them what they need. They have a sense of who's doing well in their job, who's growing, who's happy, who's stuck, maybe who had a rough month either personally or at work. They're aware. Their field of vision interpersonally is pretty broad. But when a leader's starting down the road of burnout or starting to drain, as we might say, one of the first things that contracts is their field of attention interpersonally. It narrows, and they still maybe hear the loudest people, the person who's complaining or making a fuss, and they're tracking the highest stakes situations. But that wider net, that awareness of maybe how their team overall is doing, that has shrunk. The version I see of this most often is a leader who maybe 6 months in, they can't really tell you what's going on with maybe 4 or 5 of their 7 direct reports. And it's not because they don't care. It's because their bandwidth has narrowed because they just can't hold attention to all of those people.
Yeah. And the team feels that, long before the leader knows anything's wrong, the team's kind of already registered this narrowing, this contraction. That's part of why we were kind of connecting these dots. When you can't see your own drain, you can't see your team's. And that's that silence tax that we talked about in the prior episode. It's only that in the case of this episode, it's slightly different. It's showing up slightly differently, but it's still silence, and it compounds.
It does. And the leader's drain in that sense is a multiplier on everything else. So it's not just making sure you're not getting burned out. You then can lead to burnout on your team as well. Beautifully said. So to the point of, you might try this, 3 experiments, pick one, don't try to do all 3 the same week. Like, the irony is not lost on us that we're telling burned out people they should do more. Strongly seconding that, Cade. I get that too. Yes.
So, but first one, again, pick one, the subtraction list. So this would be, simply taking 10 minutes, not 30. Again, you're burned out. 10. Take 10 minutes, open a blank page and write down 5 things that used to be in your life at work or outside of it, particularly those things outside of work that give you energy. Write down the ones that have stopped. They've quietly stopped happening in the last 6 months, not because you decided to stop, but because they got crowded out. And, I should just say, don't try to fix anything yet. Just look at the list. The list is kind of the diagnostic here. And if you can immediately rattle off 5 things, that's information for you. If you can't get past 2 things that have come off the list, I suppose that's information as well. The list is the work here. This is the diagnostic.
Yes. So let's do a second one. Can we do it? Can I add a second one, Cade?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So the second one I like is what I call measuring momentum. Right. So look at maybe 2 to 3 parts of your job that are recurring. Ask yourself, how much progress have I made against this in the past 6 months? Sometimes you realize you're making more progress than you actually thought you were. Sometimes you need to pull the lens back a little wider. I often say to a friend of mine, it's so easy if we think of a challenge as going across a bridge. We're always looking forward and seeing that we haven't maybe crossed the bridge yet and gotten to our destination, but we rarely turn around and see how far we have come. So looking at parts of your job and asking yourself, how much progress have I made is important. You can also look at parts of your job and check in around energy, how much energy they provide you. Where am I getting? I sometimes ask my clients to do an energy audit. What about work is giving you energy? You're very aware of what takes energy, but what's energizing? What was energizing for me a year ago? Is it still energizing now? If it's less energizing, what's getting in the way of you feeling progress around that part of your job? Or what can we do to help you find new sources of energy?
Yeah. And I love that idea of kind of taking the audit on how much progress are you making? We often remind clients that in the midst of any big effort, it's often messy in the middle, right?
Yes, it is.
So sometimes in the middle of that messiness, we lose a sense of how far we've come. So, all right, third one.
Or Cade, can I say one more thing about that? And a more basic way to say that is everything in the middle looks like a failure because you haven't succeeded yet. So sometimes when you're with clients and they're just like, I'm not making any progress and this doesn't feel like it's working and they're beginning to get burnout, you have to help remind them, as you said, it's the messy middle. You haven't failed. You just haven't finished. And that reframe can be really helpful. Anyway, just thinking about that.
That's a great one. And then the third one, and of course, this one's important because obviously this is a podcast about leadership and you've got to think about your team and their burnout in addition to your own. So those first two experiments were really about you. The third one is more about your people. And so with this one, pick somebody on your team, pick somebody who's doing fine on paper, hitting their numbers, not in any trouble of any sense, probably one of your strong performers. And then in your next one-on-one with them, just instead of asking, how are you? Or how's the workload? Or is there anything I can help with? Because those are all fine, but they tend to produce the same version of, I'm good, it's good, nothing to see here. So instead of those types of questions, what if you were just to ask one specific question, which is, to your point, Stacey, what's something that you used to feel energized about that doesn't feel so energizing right now? And then as we say, let silence do the heavy lifting. Shut up. Don't fix it. Don't reassure them. Don't tell them about the time that you felt that way. Just listen. What you want to do is create a little space for the signal that we've been talking about, this signal that doesn't necessarily show up easily or certainly in response to the other questions you could have asked. And you're going to find that often the answer that they give you is the most useful piece of leadership data that you're going to get.
It's so true. And it connects to what we said last week, which is we talked about asking better questions. And this is one of them. The default questions produce default answers. This question produces something different. And I want to add one note on that, which is remember that not everyone is going to answer the question the first time you ask. Some people need you to ask 2 or 3 times or in a slightly different way before they're going to say what's actually true. Some people are more cautious and they need to feel that your repeated asking shows you actually are interested in hearing the answer. And if we think about what we talked earlier, that high performers in particular may not feel comfortable expressing burnout or sharing some things, asking multiple times matter. So if you ask and you get, I'm good, everything's great, all good, that's not a failure of the experiment. That's information about how safe people are feeling, and you may need to try again in your next one-on-one.
Excellent. All right. So we had the subtraction list, which was write down the list of everything that's quietly slipped off your calendar, not intentionally, but unintentionally. We actually had 4 this week. The second one was this idea of do this audit on the progress that you have made. You're probably going to find you're making more than you realize, particularly if you're caught inside of that messy middle. Thirdly, let's think about what's bringing you a sense of meaning. Do the things that were once meaningful still feel meaningful? Where do you need to go to get that energy? And then in relation to your people, pick that one person that always says everything's fine and just ask that question. What's something that perhaps isn't as energizing for you as it was at one point prior? So there you have your experiments this week on You Might Try This.
Great. And next week, we're picking up the question of where leadership influence actually comes from, because the people with the most pull in an organization often aren't the ones with the biggest titles. So next week, we're going to talk about the authority illusion, why the leaders with the most influence often have the least formal power.
That promises to be a good one. Stacey, I'll see you then.
See you then, Cade.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to You Might Try This, brought to you by EDC and Edgewise Media. To learn more about the podcast, visit youmightTryThis.com or connect with us on social media.